Seahawks and Niners on Sunday. Greg Olsen will be on the call for Fox TV, and he's kind enough to join us right now. Greg, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks, guys. Good to be on.
How do you prep for game number one, Greg? Do you look at this preseason tape? Do you go back to the two matchups last year between the Niners and Seahawks? What is your methodology to get ready for number one?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think week one is always, very similar to when you're a player, very similar to what these coaches and players are going through. It's kind of a mix of everything, right? You go back and you look at, what did the teams do well last year? Where were some of their sticking points at different parts of the season? Where was the evolution? Where was the growth? And you have to say, okay, that the areas in which they saw big progress last year, let's continue to focus that you have to imagine they're going to try to carry that into this season, right? So with Seattle, it's all right. The growth of the defense, kind of post that Ernest Jones trade, the defense started to look a little bit more like what you're used to seeing out of Mike Macdonald and the way he wanted to bring that style of defense from Baltimore. That it didn't look that way earlier in the year, and it much more so looked like that at the end of the year, right? So you start there. You look at the preseason, you say, okay, who are the new faces, the draft picks, the new additions? Preseason nowadays is very complicated because both from a schematic standpoint and a personnel standpoint, it's not going to look a whole lot like what we're going to see on Sunday of week one. So I think it's personnel. I think it's track record. You study Clint Kubiak and you say, okay, what led Kubiak in New Orleans last year to take the league by storm? Through the first 2 weeks, they scored on their first 15 offensive possessions. Then what changed in New Orleans? And what can you expect to be the carryover? So you really go personnel. You say, trends from last year to this year. So it's really a mixed bag, and it's a difficult task for everybody.
So who will you focus on from a Seahawks perspective?
Well, I think the easiest person in that whole conversation, of course, is Sam Darnold, right? I think Sam, the free agent, signing this year. We all saw the year he had last year with Kevin O'Connell out in Minnesota. I thought it was a really good hire by Macdonald to bring in Kubiak. It's a style in which I think we've seen Sam play well, a little bit more under center, more play action, less of the drop back stuff that we saw in the passing game last year with Geno and the Seahawks offense last year. So I think it all starts and stops with Sam offensively. Jackson Smith and Jigba, can he ascend to that number one role without DK and Tyler Lockett? So offensively, I think there's a lot of new faces that are going to garner the vast majority of the storylines. And frankly, if I'm a Seahawks fan, that's where the bulk of my interest is earlier in the year, because I think defensively, this Seahawks defense, if they can stay healthy, I think this Seahawks defense has the chance to be a top 5, top 7 defense by the end of the season. I think schematically, and then with Macdonald, and I think personnel-wise, I think they're really good.
So help me understand the last part, because I tend to agree with you that they're going to be a really good defense, but I was doing a guest spot of my own yesterday in San Francisco, and the host was like, all right, well, why are they going to be so good? And when you start going through the names, there's not a lot of real star players. They don't have a star edge rusher that everybody in the league knows and a sack master. Like, what is it that tells you this defense would be that good?
Well, partially, I think because of the improvement we saw last year. So I had them in week 11. I called that Seahawks 49ers game last year in week 11. And, just going back and looking at my notes and looking at some of the things that I had prepped, for that game last year, all the questions were, it's not the style of defense that Macdonald is used to running. It was a lot more single high safety. They were a lot more susceptible to play action downfield passing. And it was everything opposite of what Macdonald's teams were, especially in this time in Baltimore. 2 high safeties, did a great job playing high to low, no real big plays allowed, and really control the game with his front. And I think, obviously I'm not telling you guys something you don't know. The linebacker situation last year, letting Bobby go, kind of moving on there. Until they really made the change of the 2 off-ball backers, and the big one being with the trade with Ernest Jones coming from Tennessee, it felt like they finally got that second level figured out and then allowed the coverage to fall into place. I think they add DeMarcus Lawrence this year as a good depth piece who prior to being injured last year, is as good, especially as a run defender, as any defensive lineman we've seen in the last couple of years. I think Boye Mafe is a really good young edge player that can get after the passer. Leonard Williams, a premier interior defensive lineman. Witherspoon's as good of a safety inside and out as there is in the league. I think they've got some experience at safety. So when you start going piece by piece, I think what we're seeing around the league is you don't have to have one star. You can have a lot of really good depth pieces, a lot of really good starting caliber defenders. And with the right coach and a guy like McDonald, who's proven to be a defensive architect at a high level, that is really the recipe for playing consistent ball. You don't need to pin all the hopes of the success of that unit on one or two guys' shoulders. And I think that's actually a benefit.
You know the voice. He'll be in the booth with my buddy Joe Davis this Sunday afternoon with the Niners and the Seahawks kicking it all off there at Lumen Field. Did you get a chance, Greg, in your career to see Sam Darnold pre-2024? And I know you guys saw him last year. And if so, did you see a metamorphosis?
Yeah, and listen, I think a lot of the credit has to go to Sam. I think it's easy to sit here and say, oh, he had Justin Jefferson and he had Addison and he had Kevin O'Connell, and all those things are true. But I think you have to give Sam, first and foremost, a lot of the credit for the turnaround. It was not an easy start to his career in New York, and then obviously his time in Carolina didn't go, and kind of found new life and was given an opportunity with O'Connell to kind of start a new chapter of his career, and obviously more than made up for it. I think when you look at and this is what I imagine Kubiak and McDonald are looking at as they kind of put this thing together since they signed Sam, is, okay, let's look at what did Kevin O'Connell do with Sam that made him so successful? And yes, throwing to Justin Jefferson certainly helps, but it was under center. It's play action. It's staying out of drop back passing downs. It's using first and second down in the passing game to try to generate explosives downfield. Like, that's where Sam was at his best. He's a very accurate downfield passer. Stay out of those third downs. Stay out of shotgun drop back pass when the defense can dial up their best pass pressures and their most elaborate coverage disguises. Stay out of that. And that's not, and frankly, that's not unique to Sam. That's the 32 NFL teams every weekend, 27, 28 of them are probably playing with that set of rules. There's a handful of guys in the league that can stand back and shotgun and operate in a passing situation for the bulk of the game. That there's very few of those guys, and everyone else you can see around the league is kind of trying to play by the same formula. So I think Kubiak's job, which is very much what his pedigree is from his time with Shanahan and obviously all the way back to his time with his father, is more downhill run game, more under center run game. Get Kenneth Walker going north and south, not so much side to side with all the negative runs and the negative losses they took last year. Get him under center, downhill run game, early down play action, throw the ball downfield, and really stress the secondary before you get to third and passing downs. And I think that's the strength of Sam. I think that's the tendencies of Kubiak as a play caller. So it does make a lot of sense why they've tried to marry the two of them together this offseason.
What do you make of a roster that has 5 tight ends, a fullback, and 3 wide receivers that may have made the team because of their blocking?
Well, the 5 tight ends part I love. So I would say Schneid's is doing a great job in the talent acquisition of tight ends. But listen, if anyone who's watched Kubiak's teams, anyone who watched his father, anyone who understands the tree he comes from, and then obviously just as recently as what he did last year in New Orleans, they're going to introduce 2-back sets. They're going to be in I formation. They're going to be in 2 tight end, 2-back. Like, that is a big staple of this style of system. And, you think back to his time at San Francisco and even before that with Shanahan in Houston, it's very tried and true what they want to be. Now, do they have Juszczyk? Do they have a guy like Kittle and a Juszczyk who really can be those hybrid, you're in 21 personnel with 2 backs, but then you're in 12, then you're in 11 formations and you don't really have to sub? I don't know how many teams have those types of personnel guys, but from a philosophical standpoint, they're going to be an I formation. They are going to run the ball downhill on early downs. Everything they're doing is to win early downs so that they can be in 50-50 neutral. I could pass, I could run. I don't have to be in 11 personnel, and I don't have to drop back out of the shotgun and throw the ball downfield on every third down. That's Kubiak. I think that's what McDonald wants to be the complement to the way he's building this defense. And frankly, that's Sam Darnold. That's when Sam's at his best. So I think they're smart. The personnel has to match. The roster has to match the style of play, and both sides of the ball have to match the style of the other. And I think this version of Seattle is a lot closer than when I had them earlier in the year last year before they kind of started putting it together down the stretch.
And Greg, I think when you go back to your time playing, I think those years you've covered the Seahawks from the booth, I think there's been kind of one constant. Certainly in sports media, it's been a constant. That has been the struggle of the group on the offensive line, whether that was some veteran guys, whether that was money spent, whether that was the lack of development, whatever it was, it just has not been effective really for the last decade. Game 2 of this preseason, 48 carries, 268 yards, moving people like we've not seen moved in any preseason game, nor regular season game really for the Seahawks. When you look at the personnel now on this offensive line with a healthy Abe Lucas, Gray Zabel at left guard, Sundell at center, do you think this could be actually a strength rather than just a continual weakness?
I do, and I think obviously and you just said it. I think a big issue they've had, especially at the tackle positions, where there's no question that Charles Cross can play. There's no question that Lucas can play. Like, it's really been a matter of how consistently are they in the lineup together, and that unit operating as a five cohesive every week, same combination in the same system, and really getting a feel for what they're being asked to do. So I think there's just the baseline health that every team is fighting, especially at the offensive line nowadays, where it's hard to field 5 competent offensive linemen, let alone have the depth to get into 7, 8, 9, so on and so forth. And we see that narrative play out all across the league. I think the rookie, Zabel at center at a North Dakota State, I think he's a really good young player. I think they have high hopes of him, obviously taking him where they did in the draft. They think that he can be a staple there, kind of solidifying them for the long haul. But I think the second element to it all is they got to get some consistency in what they're being asked to do schematically. I think what they were asked to do last year was when it was 2/3 pass. It was a lot of shotgun. Obviously that was Gino's specialty, he was throwing the ball. Like, that is a very big stressor on a healthy, good offensive line, let alone one that's dealing with some moving parts. So I think getting under center, I think being able to get more of an early play action game and run game, use those 2 backs. I think all of that, everyone talks about what that will do for Sam Darnold and the quarterback, but it's really just as much, if not a bigger impact on the offensive line. There are very few offensive lines in the league that can be in shotgun drop back pass for 2/3 of the game. It's very difficult in today's modern NFL with the way these guys can pass rush and disguise coverages and blitzes. So I think schematically they will be helped a lot by what Kubiak asks them to do in the passing game. And then I think, of course, the nature, can they stay healthy? Can they keep the 2 tackles on the field together? If they could accomplish those 2 things, I don't think there's any reason why the expectation shouldn't be that that unit is significantly improved.
Last 2 really quick ones here, Greg. Is it true that Arroyo is going to be so critical in finally tipping the scales back to Miami being tight end U and not Iowa?
Well, it's a great question. I don't think there's any question. Listen, I love my Iowa guys. Kittle's a buddy. I mean, they've got some real dudes that have come out of there. You'll never be able to convince me ever that Miami is not always and will not always be tight end U. So I hope he plays awesome. I think he's a really talented player. I hope they find a way to get him involved early in the year, break off some of that rookie rust and break off some of that apprehension that all young players have entering the league. But I would love nothing more than another Miami tight end to kind of sit at the top of the rankings across the league like we were for so long, all the way back to Bubba and Shockey and Winslow and all the way down the line, Jimmy Graham. So I would love nothing more for him to be that guy. But I have this argument with my Iowa and my Notre Dame guys all the time. There's one TEU, it's Miami, and everyone else produces some really great players, don't get me wrong. But the run we had of not only great college players, but then great NFL players is pretty, in my opinion, unmatched.
Greg, thank you, and we'll watch on Sunday, and appreciate you coming by.
Thank you, Greg.
I appreciate it. Yeah, take care, guys.
All right.
Have a good one.
There you go. There's Greg Olsen, Brock.